You've heard of The Who, you've heard of Led Zeppelin, but what if the bands that inspired them never got famous? One of these groups literally invented rock opera years before anyone cared. Another one smashed TVs on stage and still couldn't get a record deal in the US. Today, we're digging up 13 forgotten rock bands from the 60s and 70s that deserve to be legends. And if you're a fan of deep cuts, obscure gems, and bands that should have changed music history, you're exactly where you need to be. Formed in Birmingham, England in 1965, The Move were one of the most inventive British rock bands of their era. They blended psychedelic rock, hard-edged riffs, and power pop melodies, backed by sophisticated songwriting. Their early lineup included Roy Wood, who would later co-found Electric Light Orchestra. Despite their innovation, they struggled to build an international presence, especially in the US. The band became known for their outrageous stage antics, including smashing television sets during live performances. This theatricality, along with their dynamic sound, made them stand out in the vibrant British scene of the late 60s. Their manager, Tony Secunda, pushed them toward controversy and spectacle, which gained them headlines but also limited radio play. Their discography includes tracks like I Can Hear the Grass Grow and Flowers in the Rain, which was the first song ever played on BBC Radio 1. However, constant lineup changes, label disputes, and an unclear brand identity held them back from long-term commercial success. The Soft Boys formed in Cambridge, England around 1976 and quickly carved out a space in the underground with their surreal, offbeat take on rock. Led by Robin Hitchcock, they combined psychedelic textures with punk energy and absurdist lyrics. Their early sound was difficult to classify, which made them both intriguing and hard to market. The band leaned heavily on jangly guitars, shifting time signatures, and song structures that defied conventional pop formats. Their best-known album, Underwater Moonlight, became a cult classic, showcasing their balance of melodic instinct and chaotic experimentation. Though it wasn't a commercial success at the time, the album would later influence alternative and indie rock acts across the next decades. The Soft Boys stood apart from the punk explosion of the late 70s by refusing to follow its simplicity. Despite their originality, the band broke up shortly after releasing their most acclaimed work. Caravan emerged from the Canterbury scene in England in 1960, a subculture known for its blend of progressive rock, jazz, and whimsical British humor. They were one of the core bands of this movement, fusing complex arrangements with melodic sensibility. Their music stood out for its balance of sophistication and playfulness. The band's sound was marked by extended compositions, jazz-influenced solos and lyrics that often leaned into the surreal. Their landmark album, In the Land of Grey and Pink, released in 1970, is considered a high point of the genre. Though it received critical acclaim, it never broke into the mainstream charts, especially outside Europe. Caravan's lineup remained relatively stable through their classic years, with Richard Sinclair, Pi Hastings, and David Sinclair crafting a signature sound centered around organ-driven melodies and pastoral themes. Their songs often featured shifts in tone from dreamy to intense within a single track. Have you ever listened to In the Land of Grey and Pink? What did you think? Underrated, classic, or acquired taste? Drop your thoughts below. The Tubes formed in San Francisco in the early 70s and became known for their outrageous live performances, which combined rock music with elements of theater, satire, and shock art. Their frontman, Fee Waybill, often took on bizarre stage personas, creating a spectacle that was part concert, part performance art. Musically, the Tubes mixed glam rock, hard rock, punk, and funk into a chaotic but compelling blend. Songs like White Punks on Dope and She's a Beauty captured their knack for satire and sharp social commentary. However, their theatrical style made them hard to categorize and limited their airplay on mainstream radio. Their shows often featured elaborate sets, costumes, dancers, and scripted segments, drawing both fascination and criticism. While they gained a loyal fan base and critical respect, their controversial content and refusal to tone down their stage antics made record labels cautious and promotion inconsistent. Over time, the Tubes gained cult status, especially among fans who appreciated the crossover between rock and performance art. Their bold approach influenced many artists who blurred the line between music and visual storytelling, but they never achieved the widespread fame their originality deserved. The creation formed in Hertfordshire, England in 1966, emerging from the same mod and beat scene that produced The Who and Small Faces. Known for their aggressive guitar sound and artistic flair, they were one of the earliest bands to incorporate visual art into their performances, literally painting on stage during solos. Their guitarist, Eddie Phillips, was among the first to use a violin bow on electric guitar, predating similar techniques made famous later. Their debut single, Making Time, stood out with its explosive energy and proto-punk edge. Although they gained some traction in Germany and had a strong following in Europe, they never found commercial success in the UK or US. Management issues and lack of consistent promotion left them behind as the scene evolved around them. The band's music fused sharp R&B rhythms with abstract, often surreal lyrics. Their song Painter Man became a cult favorite and hinted at their conceptual leanings. They recorded enough material for an album, but internal conflicts and constant lineup changes disrupted their momentum. Their influence, however, spread across punk, glam, and Britpop decades later. Soft Machine formed in Canterbury, England in 1966 and quickly became one of the central forces in the Canterbury scene. Their sound evolved rapidly from psychedelic rock to experimental jazz fusion, creating a unique catalog that defied easy classification. They were pioneers of genre blending, often abandoning traditional song structures in favor of complex instrumentals. The early lineup included Kevin Ayers, Mike Ratledge, Robert Wyatt, and David Allen. Their self-titled debut mixed whimsical lyrics with unusual time signatures, but later albums like Third and Fourth leaned heavily into improvisational jazz. These works featured extended compositions, layered textures, and minimal vocals, reflecting the band's shift into avant-garde territory. Despite critical acclaim, their music was considered too complex and cerebral for mainstream success. Their performances often resembled jazz concerts more than rock shows, which limited their commercial reach, but earned them deep respect in progressive music circles. The band's technical skill and willingness to challenge conventions became their defining trait. Ever tried listening to their album Third all the way through? What was the experience like? If not, will you give it a try? Let me know in the comments. Renaissance was founded in 1969 by Keith Relf and Jim McCarty, both former members of the Yardbirds. However, the classic version of the band emerged a few years later with a new lineup, including Annie Haslam, whose soaring vocals became the group's signature. They stood out for blending classical music structures with progressive rock, creating a sound that was elegant and intricate. The band avoided electric guitars in most of their arrangements, favoring piano, acoustic instruments, and orchestral textures. Their compositions often stretched past the 10-minute mark and featured poetic lyrics that touched on mythology, literature, and spirituality. This set them apart from heavier or more psychedelic prog acts of the era. Albums like Ashes Are Burning and Scheherazade and Other Stories showcased their ambitious approach. Renaissance gained a loyal following in Europe and the northeastern United States, but their refined sound didn't align with the harder, grittier trends that dominated radio play in the mid-70s. This limited their exposure despite consistent critical praise. Kaleidoscope was formed in London in 1967 and became known for their dreamy, whimsical approach to psychedelic rock. Their music blended gentle melodies, surreal storytelling, and a distinctly British sense of fantasy. Their debut album, Tangerine Dream, is considered a hidden gem of late 60s British psychedelia. The band, led by Peter Daltrey and Eddie Pumer, created soundscapes filled with Victorian imagery, strange characters, and lyrical mysticism. Their songs didn't rely on heavy riffs or technical flash. Instead, they focused on mood, narrative, and atmosphere. This gave them a unique voice during a time when many bands were competing for volume and spectacle. They later changed their name to Fairfield Parlour and adjusted their style slightly, but the core elements remained: pastoral themes, Baroque arrangements, and introspective lyrics. Despite strong songwriting and critical acclaim, neither incarnation of the band found lasting commercial success.
The moon's so full! So now it's up to you to choose.
Captain Beefheart and the Magic Band, led by Don Van Vliet, emerged from California's experimental underground in the late 1960s. Their music fused blues, rock, avant-garde, and free jazz in a way that baffled critics and audiences alike. Their most well-known work, Trout Mask Replica, produced by Frank Zappa in 1969, became one of the most controversial and influential albums in experimental rock history. The band operated with intense discipline behind the scenes. Van Vliet was known for pushing his musicians to the limit, often demanding they play complex, dissonant parts with military precision. Rehearsals were rigorous and sometimes extreme, resulting in music that sounded chaotic but was highly orchestrated. Their sound was deliberately abrasive, filled with abrupt tempo shifts, jarring rhythms, and surreal lyrics. Commercial success was never part of their trajectory. Radio stations avoided them, and most record buyers couldn't make sense of what they heard. However, the band gained a cult following and became a reference point for avant-garde musicians, noise rock artists, and post-punk innovators. Their refusal to conform made them pioneers in pushing rock beyond its boundaries. The Pretty Things were formed in London in 1963 by Phil May and Dick Taylor, who had briefly played with the Rolling Stones. Their early sound was raw and aggressive, rooted in rhythm and blues, and earned them a reputation for being one of the wildest British bands of the 60s. Despite this, they never reached the commercial level of their peers. As the decade progressed, the Pretty Things evolved from garage rock into psychedelia and progressive rock. In 1968, they released SF Sorrow, one of the earliest concept albums in rock history. Though now considered a landmark, the album was poorly promoted and overshadowed by Tommy by the Who, which came out months later with more publicity. Their music remained bold and unconventional throughout the 70s. They dabbled in hard rock and proto-punk, but their refusal to follow trends made them difficult to market. Phil May's theatrical vocals and the band's willingness to experiment set them apart, but they couldn't shake the status of being a band's band. Pink Fairies formed in London in 1970 and quickly became a symbol of anarchic, fuzz-driven rock. Closely tied to the Notting Hill underground and the same scene that birthed Hawkwind, they brought together psychedelic rock, proto-punk, and biker-style rebellion into a loud, chaotic package. Their motto was essentially, play fast, play loud, and don't care what anyone thinks. Their music combined heavy riffs, distorted guitars, and DIY energy. Albums like Never Never Land and What a Bunch of Sweeties were raw and unpolished, but full of attitude. The band often encouraged fans to break rules and live freely, messages that resonated with youth seeking an alternative to commercial rock. Live shows were unpredictable and wild, often featuring extended jams and spontaneous antics. The fairies embraced their outsider status and never tried to clean up their image for the mainstream. This gave them street credibility, but also meant they received little support from radio or major press. The Zombies were formed in St. Albans, England in 1961 and became known for their lush harmonies, jazzy-influenced arrangements, and Baroque pop sound. Unlike many of their British invasion peers, they relied less on raw energy and more on musical finesse. Their early hits included She's Not There and Tell Her No, which found success in both the UK and US. In 1968, they released Odyssey and Oracle, recorded at Abbey Road Studios with minimal budget and no label support at the time. Though it initially flopped, the album later gained recognition as one of the greatest records of the 60s. Tracks like Time of the Season showcase their sophisticated songwriting and layered vocal work. The band broke up before the album gained traction, missing out on the wave of acclaim that came later. Part of their struggle was timing. They were ahead of trends, but lacked the promotional push to reach a wider audience. Their music didn't align with the louder, more aggressive rock that was dominating by the late 60s. And there you have it, 13 bands that didn't crack the charts, didn't pack stadiums, but absolutely should have been legends. Some of them were too weird, too early, or just too good for the machine they were stuck in. But that's what makes digging into this side of music history so addictive. If you found even one band today that made you stop and think, "How I have never heard this before," then we did our job. And now it's your turn. Go hit the comments and tell us which one hit you hardest. Also, if you enjoyed this breakdown, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. We've got way more music stories headed your way.